Hi everyone, this is your study guide for our final exam. So in this lecture, I am going to go over everything that you need to know about our final exam, and you should watch the entire lecture, and then also give yourself some time to study before you start our final. So first, some important details about the final exam. You can take the exam anytime during the week of finals. If this is a short-term class, your finals week is the same as the last week of instruction. So you'll be working on your final paper as well as the final exam. So make sure that you do leave yourself some time to attend to and complete both of those. The final exam must be completed and submitted no later than 11:59 p.m. on the due date. You can see the due date by going to this week's module and checking for that. If you have any questions, please feel free to text me on the Remind app and I can clarify that due date for you. Once you start on the final, you will have 2 hours to take the exam. So you should not start any later than 10 p.m. on the due date. That way you have those full 2 hours before the exam is due so that you can use all the time that you need. No late exams will be given for just about any reason. So make sure that you plan accordingly. If you have extra time on the final exam due to a disability, please make sure that you let me know so that I can apply that extra time, and then make sure that you start earlier than 10 p.m. on the due date, depending on how much extra time you have. Again, any questions about that, please reach out to me before the exam day. So how does our final exam work? Our final exam is an essay exam. So in this lecture, we will be going over 4 possible exam questions. On the exam itself, you will see 2 of those questions, and you choose your favorite out of those 2. So what you should do is study for the 4, and then the 2 that you see on the exam, you choose the one that you would like to answer. For whichever question you choose to answer, you should use 2 pieces of evidence from whichever text or video is required, and you should also use the quote sandwich method to answer your chosen essay question. I do not have a specific length in terms of how long your answer needs to be. I have students that write just a couple of paragraphs and earn almost full credit on the exam. I have students that write multiple pages and still don't say what they need to say in order to get, the best grade, right? So it just depends on how you organize your answer and how long it takes you to fully answer the question that you have chosen to answer. So these are our exam options. Option number 1, which you may or may not see on the actual final exam. This one has to do with rhetorical analysis. If you see this option on the exam, you'll need to use this excerpt from Backpacks versus Briefcases as evidence. You'll need to identify and explain the ways in which rhetoric functions in our daily lives. And this is the excerpt here. So if this question is on the exam, you will be provided with this excerpt so that you can pull from it to create your answer. Remember that we also want to use 2 pieces of evidence. So I would need to use 2 little snippets of this one excerpt here. And then, of course, the quote sandwich method. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 has to do with looking at a source. In this case, you are looking at the awakening. And if this option is on the exam, you will need to discuss how Edna can be seen as a hero for overcoming obstacles in her life and blazing her own path. For whichever quotes you use, make sure to use the quote sandwich method to introduce, cite, and explain your findings. Note about this one, I realize this is an unpopular opinion, right? Most of us are like really mad at Edna by the end of this particular novel, but that's why I assigned this one. Arguing against your own beliefs is an important skill, and sometimes you are assigned a topic rather than choosing it yourself, so this gives you some practice with that. Remember that you should prepare for this option by choosing 2 quotes with citations before you get to actually writing the exam. So if you do choose to answer this one, remember you can prepare ahead of time by choosing a couple of quotes and kind of planning your answer before we get to the exam. So that's option number 2. Option number 3 has to do with scholarly sources, and this one is much more open-ended because you are not given an excerpt that you can use, so you would need to prepare for this one by going back in our schedule of classes and looking at all of the different links and videos and handouts that you were given about scholarly sources. You can use any of those articles or handouts to prepare for this particular option, just in case this one is on the exam. So if this option is there and you choose to write about it, your job here would be to define a scholarly source, explain how to determine the credibility of sources, and then give your top 3 tips for finding, annotating, and citing scholarly sources. So I want a couple of things in this response. Number 1, define a scholarly source. Number 2, explain some steps that we can take to determine the credibility of sources. And then finally, give me 3 tips total, not 3 for each, okay? So 3 tips having to do with finding, annotating, and citing scholarly sources. Remember that if this one is there for you, then the place that you should go to prepare would be the schedule of classes, and you can use any assigned reading or handout that has to do with any of these things surrounding scholarly sources. So again, I would gather some notes and some quotes. I would maybe choose my 3 favorite tips so that by the time I go to the final exam, I have all of my notes about that stuff and I'm ready to just put them together for my answer if this one appears on the exam. So that's option number 3. Lastly, we have option number 4. This one is about current events. And in this case, you're going to be using a video as your evidence. So remember that in one of the weeks of class, you were assigned to watch a video about either binge drinking or sexual assault. You got to choose which video you watch, and in this case, if this option is there for the final exam, you will also choose which video you want to discuss. So for whichever video you watched and choose to discuss, you're going to use that video to help you explain how the video helped you better understand issues that can affect students on college campuses. You should present a brief argument persuading your audience to consider the impact this issue can have on individuals. So if this option is there, your goal is to use evidence from one of the videos to explain how that video helped you have a better understanding of this problem, and then also to persuade others to kind of better understand how this particular problem can impact us as individuals. Links to the videos can be found in our previous week's modules. Remember that you're using evidence from the video here, so you should refer to specific moments in the video or maybe a quote that somebody said in that particular video. And those are the kinds of things that you should have ready to go by the time you get to this option on the exam, if this one is there. All right, so those are our 4 options. One other thing that I want to go over in this lecture is just a very quick recap of the quote sandwich method. So remember that in the quote sandwich method, this is a method for building your paragraphs. The first thing that you need to do is make a claim in your topic sentence. The next thing that you need to do is to introduce your evidence. Remember to include the author's name and the name of the source. If you're using a video, you can just use the video name. If you know who is speaking in the video, then you could go ahead and give us that information. Also, remember that when you're making a claim, that should be directly responding to and answering the question for whichever option it is that you're answering in your final exam, okay? So make that claim, introduce your evidence, then you need to use a signal phrase. Remember that this is a noun and verb phrase. For example, the author explains, or the handout states, or in the video, this person says. Okay, so that's a signal phrase that comes directly before your quote or paraphrase. Remember to use quotation marks if you quote something directly. If you are summing something up, that's okay, but you do not need to have the quotation marks there. However, you do still need all of this other stuff, right? So even if you're summing something up, remember that you still need to introduce your source and use a signal phrase, because that is the only way that your reader knows that you are pointing to some outside evidence. Also, remember to cite an MLA. If you are citing a handout or one of the links, for example, then you would just have the author's last name and a page number. A couple of things that come up here: if you don't have a page number because the source is only online, you can do a print preview and see where your quote would fall on, this particular handout. If it was printed, use that page number. If you have more than one author, go ahead and include more than one last name. If you do not have an author, go ahead and use the first word of the title along with the page number. Any of that information, usually it's just the author's last name and a page number, goes in parentheses, which are these here, right after your quote, and then your punctuation, so like a period, goes right after that. The last part of the quote sandwich is the significance. So make sure that you are explaining how this quote or paraphrase backs up and supports your claim. Your significance should be twice as long as the quote or paraphrase itself. So make sure that you are doing more explaining than you are quoting. So that is a very quick guide to the quote sandwich method. You can revisit any of our previous lectures about using evidence if you would like more help with how to create these quote sandwiches. This is an example of a quote sandwich. So I've given you what a quote sandwich paragraph can look like. I will post a copy of this PowerPoint to our Canvas so that you can spend some more time with this particular example if you would like to. But basically you can see that the author here makes a claim. They say that this character changes drastically in this story. Then they introduce the story, right? This is the author, this is the title, and then they use the signal phrase, "we're told." Then we have the quotation marks because this is a direct quote, and then we have a page number. The author's name is not in this particular set of parentheses because the author's name is mentioned in the same sentence. So if you're doing that, remember that you only need a page number. Punctuation goes after your citation. After that, we've got a good amount of explanation here. Ideally, I would have even wanted this explanation to go on for maybe one or two more sentences, but this is a pretty solid quote sandwich example. There are some other resources for helping you with how to make a quote sandwich and how to deal with timed writing, along with some TED Talks for students, because I know that the end of the semester or the end of class can be a difficult time. So take a few minutes and check those things out just to help you get better prepared. Quick recap of the final exam. Make sure that you study for all 4 of the possible questions. Notes are okay for the final. This is an open note final exam, so prepare, have some notes, have your quotes and citations all ready to go. Once you open the exam, you will see two of the options that I just went over. You only need to answer one of those two options. For whichever option you answer, make sure to use the quote sandwich method and answer the question in about 2 paragraphs. You can add an intro if time allows. The final is timed. You have 2 hours to complete the final. You need to start the final with enough time to finish by 11:59 p.m. on the due date. Absolutely no late exams will be accepted, so make sure that you plan accordingly. And even if you feel like you're running out of time or you don't finish or it's not as good as you want, turn in something, and that way I can give you as many points as possible rather than just not turning in anything. All right, and we've got a Kermit the Frog ferociously typing as some inspiration for you. So make sure that you finish strong. We're almost done. Keep going. And if you have any questions or you need any help, reach out to me, and I'm happy to clarify and help however I can.